I always thought the hardest sound in the world was my mother's voice when she called at the wrong time. That morning, I was just finishing going over my quarterly reports when the phone vibrated, flashing Eunice Pemberton on the screen. My hand froze over my cup of coffee. In our family, we didn't call just to see how things were going. I'm Arrow Pemberton, and yes, my parents did name me Arrow. My father claimed it symbolized determination. Mother said it sounded unusual enough to memorize. Neither of them ever admitted that the name was just trending on some show they were watching before I was born. Eunice and Orville Pemberton always cared more about the outward impression than the content. I let the phone ring twice more before answering it. A little revenge for all the times I'd been ignored. "Arrow, you finally deigned to answer." My mother's dry voice sounded like she was doing me a favor by calling. "Hello, Mom. I'm at work." I tried to make it sound weighty, even though I knew my work was never serious to her. "We're having dinner on Saturday," she said in a tone that didn't mean no. "There'll be important people there. Your father's finally close to a deal with Aquacorp. They want our land for the new project." I pinched the bridge of my nose with my fingers. My parents owned several parcels of land outside of town, inherited from my grandfather. For years, they'd been trying to make a good use of it, as my father put it. "What am I supposed to do at this dinner?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Give the impression of a well-to-do family, of course. All these investors are obsessed with family values. Wear something decent," she said the last words with a pressure, as if I usually wore rags. I glanced down at my perfectly cut Brooke Taylor suit, which cost more than a month's rent on my parents' house. The irony was that they had no idea what I really did. To them, I was just something with ecology, as my father disparagingly put it. "I'll see if I can get free," I replied. "I won't, but I will." My mother cut me off. 7 o'clock tonight. Don't be late." The connection was broken. No bye or love you. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard those words from my parents, though. Once upon a time, it had hurt me. Now, I just took it as a given that the Pemberton family didn't show warmth. My childhood in Winchester was spent in constant attempts to conform to expectations that were never clearly stated. "You have to be better," my mother would say. "Don't dishonor the family name," my father echoed. But what exactly better meant, and how exactly one could dishonor the family name, they never explained. I remember building a water filter at the age of 10 from scrap materials after reading about pollution problems in the local newspaper. I showed it to my parents, expecting some praise. My mother only grimaced at the construction of plastic bottles and activated charcoal. "You stained the carpet," she said. "Why would you do that? We buy bottled water." Father, flipping through the financial summaries, quipped, "If you want to do something that makes money." When I was 11, I won the school science fair with a project on sewage treatment. My parents didn't show up. Mother had a reception at her book club where she never read the books being discussed, but always had an opinion about them. Father had an important meeting, though I happened to know he was just golfing with his partners. When I was 16, I received a grant to research environmentally friendly water purification technologies. My father called it a waste of time. My mother said, "Normal girls your age think about dating, not sewage." Perhaps that's why I persisted so tenaciously in water treatment technology. It was the one field that belonged only to me, where there were no disappointed sighs from my mother or dismissive glances from my father. Water didn't judge me. The water just flowed its way, overcoming obstacles. After university, instead of going to work for one of the big corporations, I started my own company, PureFlow. I started in a tiny office that looked more like a storage room. The first 2 years were a living hell, sleepless nights, investor rejections, technical failures. But I developed an innovative filtration system that used 70% less energy than its existing counterparts while removing microplastics. My parents thought I was doing something in some small office. I didn't dissuade them because, why? To hear my mother say that business isn't a woman's business? Or to hear my father give advice in an area he has absolutely no knowledge of? 5 years later, Purpatalk was the leading provider of innovative water purification systems in 3 countries. We had patents on 12 technologies, And Ecology magazine named me one of the 30 most influential figures in green technology. My parents didn't know about it. I didn't tell them, and they didn't ask. And now my mother is calling me to give me the impression of a well-to-do family to some investors. Ironically, the company they were so desperate to make a deal with, Aquacorp, was one of our main competitors. I met with their management last week. They were trying to get a license to use our technology. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the panoramic window at the Winchester cityscape. My office was on the 22nd floor, and from here I could even see the suburb where my parents' house stood, typically middle class, with a claim to luxury they couldn't afford. My assistant Tasha knocked on the door. "Is everything okay? You have a strange look on your face." "Family stuff," I replied, and she nodded understandingly. The test results came back on the new membrane. It's 15% more effective than predicted. Work is what always brought me back to reality. Not the perfect parental love I dreamed of as a child, but concrete, measurable results. Numbers don't lie, don't manipulate, don't disappoint. "Wonderful," I smiled. "Tell the team I'm impressed." Tasha nodded and walked out, and I went back to thinking about the upcoming dinner. The rational part of me was telling me to pass. Why subject myself to another round of criticism and neglect? I had long outgrown my need for parental approval. At least that's what I told myself. But the other part of me, the same 10-year-old girl with the homemade filter, still hoped. Maybe this time would be different? Maybe they would finally see that I had accomplished something? It was a silly, naive hope, but it never completely faded. By evening, I had made a decision. I will go to this dinner, but not to give the impression of being the perfect daughter. I'm going to go to find out once and for all if my parents can be even slightly proud of me. And if not, well, it will be time to finally let go of this childhood dream. I called my mother to confirm my presence. She answered after the first ring, as if she'd been sitting by the phone. "Yes?" Her voice sounded impatient. "I'll come on Saturday," I said. "Of course you will," she said, as if there was no other option. "Wear that blue dress I gave you for Christmas." I didn't bother to remind her that the gift was 3 years ago, and the dress was long gone. In fact, I'd never worn it at all. It was one of those things my mother bought to make me look the way she thought was right. "I'll decide what to wear," I said firmly. There was a pause, during which I could almost physically feel her displeasure. "As long as it looks decent," she said at last. "You know how important this deal is to your father." I did. All deals were important to my father, all deals that were supposed to finally make him rich and successful. But somehow it never happened. There was always someone who screwed him over, didn't understand the genius of the idea, or was just jealous. It never occurred to him that the problem might be himself. "See you Saturday, Mom?" I ended the conversation without waiting for another admonition. I spent the rest of the week convincing myself that I was doing the right thing. Maybe it was time to end this relationship. Either they would accept me for who I was, or, well, I'd learned to live without their approval a long time ago. Friday night, I stood in front of the closet for a long time deciding what to wear. Part of me wanted to show up in my most expensive suit, with a watch worth as much as a used car and jewelry I could afford after my last successful contract, to show them what I'd accomplished without their support. But that would be too obvious, too childish. In the end, I chose a simple but elegant dress in a dark green color, understated enough to avoid my mother's criticism, yet impeccably cut and clearly expensive to the careful eye. Saturday morning, I was overcome with an almost physical anxiety. I canceled my morning run, couldn't eat breakfast, and double-checked my presentation for Monday's meeting, even though I knew it by heart. My phone was silent. No messages from my mother reminding me. No calls from my father asking me to bring something for dinner. They were just waiting for me to show up. The way one waits for furniture to arrive from the store. A necessary piece of furniture. Nothing more. When the clock struck 5 p.m., I realized I could no longer delay the moment. The trip to my parents' house took about 40 minutes, and I preferred to arrive a little early to prepare myself mentally. I hailed a cab, even though I usually preferred to drive myself. Today, I wanted to be able to have a drink if the situation became unbearable. As I drove, I looked at the streets of Winchester floating by, and thought about how my hometown had never been home to me. My real home was the CleanFlow office, the lab where we tested new technologies, the meetings with the team where every idea was listened to with respect. There I felt needed, understood, appreciated. The cab stopped in front of a 2-story house with perfectly trimmed bushes. Even the lawn looked like every blade of grass had been trimmed with scissors. My mother had always been obsessed with appearance. I took a deep breath, paid the cabbie, and, clutching my purse tightly, headed for the front door. My finger froze over the doorbell. It wasn't too late to turn around to say I was sick, that there was an emergency. But no, I didn't come here for them. I came here for me, to finally let go of the past and move on. I pressed the bell, preparing myself for what awaited me inside. The door opened almost instantly, as if my mother was standing behind it, counting down the seconds until I arrived. Eunice Pemberton gave me an appraising look from head to toe, lingering on my dress. Green? It sounded like an accusation. I thought you'd wear the blue one I gave you. Hello, Mom. I leaned over to kiss her cheek. She put her face up like she was doing me a favor. I can't get enough of blue. So you've gained weight, she pursed her lips. Well, come in. Don't stand on the doorstep. The neighbors are watching. I followed her gaze. Across the street, an elderly Mrs. Holt was watering her roses, absorbed in her work. I doubt she was interested in my appearance, but for my mother, the world always revolved around the impression our family made. The house looked the same inside as it had 5 years ago when I'd visited last Christmas, spotlessly clean, with beige and cream predominating, as if my mother was afraid that color might somehow give away the imperfections of their lives. There were silver-framed photos everywhere, Mom and Dad on vacation, Mom and Dad at some kind of reception, Mom and Dad playing golf. There were no pictures of me, only one from my high school graduation, and that was in the far corner of the living room. Your father's in the study, getting ready for a meeting, my mother said, heading for the kitchen. Don't bother him. I followed her. There were 6 sets of plates on the table, so there would be 4 investors. What can I do for you? I asked, even though I knew the answer. Nothing, my mother said, opening the oven. I have everything under control. You can sit in the living room for now, but don't touch anything. I've already set everything up. I took a deep breath. Not 5 minutes later, I could already feel my shoulders tensing. Who are you waiting for besides the people from Aquacorp? I asked, taking a seat on the high stool at the kitchen counter. My mother threw me an annoyed look. If you mean the plates, it's just in case. There's no telling if they'll come with helpers. Your father says they're very powerful people. Aquacorp is a big company, I nodded. I just don't understand why they want my father's land. They need a place for a new research center. Orville Pemberton, my father, walked into the kitchen. He looked exactly as I remembered him, tall, with his graying hair slicked back and a perpetually disgruntled expression. Do you have any idea how much this deal could bring in? I nodded, not clarifying that I was well aware of Aquacorp's plans. Only their new center wasn't a research center, but a production center, and they were looking for a place with good access to the groundwater they were going to use in their not-so-environmental technologies. We at Clean Patalk even prepared a lawsuit against them, but we haven't filed it in court yet, hoping to settle the matter amicably. Hello, Dad. I got up to hug him, but he only patted me lightly on the shoulder. You look good, he said, as if he expected to see me in rags. How's your, work? He always paused before the word work, as if he doubted my occupation could be called that. It's fine, I answered neutrally. The company's growing. Well. He'd already lost interest. Eunice, I put the file in the dining room. Don't move it. It's all organized. The mother pressed her lips together but remained silent. There was always this strange dynamic between them. He commanded, she obeyed with the look of a martyr, but then got even, criticizing his every decision behind his back. When are the guests arriving? I asked, glancing at the clock. It was almost 7. 8 o'clock, Dad answered. But I want everything to be ready in advance. These people don't like to wait. Mother wiped her hands on a towel. Arrow, why don't you help me set up? I need to get the crystal out of the sideboard. It wasn't a request, it was an order. I obediently made my way to the dining room, where I found the table already fully set. My mother just wanted to get me out of my father's sight so he could prepare for the meeting in peace. The next hour passed in a strange game of happy family. Mother fussed in the kitchen, occasionally checking to see if I'd moved anything in the dining room. My father paced back and forth in the living room, mumbling numbers under his breath and glancing at his watch. I sat on the sofa, leafing through an old issue of Home and Garden and feeling like an extra in the house where I'd grown up. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. Her mother froze, holding a platter of hors d'oeuvres. "It's too early." Her voice sounded almost frightened. Father rushed to the door, adjusting his tie as he went. "Arrow, put the magazine away and straighten up," my mother hissed. I put the magazine down on the table and straightened up, feeling like a teenager again. But instead of the investors from Aquacorp, it was a neighbor on the doorstep, wondering if we'd seen his cat. My dad slammed the door in his face after barely listening to the question. "That's all we need," he grumbled, walking back into the living room. "Eunice, where's my whiskey?" "You were going to keep it down until the guests arrived," his mother reminded him, but still headed for the bar in the corner of the room. "One drink to take the edge off." The father sank into a chair. "Arrow, when the Hammonds arrive, don't tell them about your work. Nobody wants to hear about what it is you do." "Water purification, Dad." I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm in the water purification business." "That's right." He waved his hand. "Nobody's interested. Just say you work in the environmental field, that's all. And if they ask about your education, don't mention that you dropped out of graduate school. I didn't drop out of graduate school. I got an honors degree, and then I got a business degree." But it was useless to argue. My father had long ago created in his head the image of a failed daughter, and no facts could change his mind. My mother returned with whiskey for my father and tea for me. She didn't even ask what I wanted to drink. "You're too thin," she said, watching me sip my tea. "Men don't like bony women like that. No wonder you're still single." "I'm not alone, Mom," I replied calmly, though I was seething inside. "I have friends, colleagues, an interesting job." "I mean a man," she rolled her eyes. "When I was your age, I was already married to your father and waiting for you. And look how well that turned out," I mumbled to myself. But luckily the doorbell rang, saving me from having to continue this conversation. This time it really was visitors. My father jumped up, sputtering his whiskey, and rushed to the door. Mother quickly took the glass from him and hissed, "Arrow, smile and try to look presentable." I pulled a duty smile onto my face, thinking about how many times as a child I had heard that phrase before guests arrived. Smile and look presentable was the unofficial motto of the Pemberton family. But instead of Aquacorp representatives, a delivery man walked through the door with a huge box. Dad signed for the delivery, glancing disappointedly at his watch. "It's almost 8 o'clock, he muttered. "Where the hell are they?" The box turned out to be his mother's order, a new set she'd decided for some reason to buy for this dinner. While she unpacked it in the kitchen, I decided to go out to the backyard for a breath of fresh air. The garden behind the house was as immaculate as everything in the house. Not a single weed, neatly trimmed bushes, beds of flowers planted in a linear pattern. I sat down on a bench under an old apple tree, the only place that reminded me of the good times of my childhood. Here I read books, hiding from parental criticism. Here I dreamed of a future where I would live by my own rules. The door to the terrace opened, and I heard my mother's irritated voice. "Arrow, what are you doing here? The guests are about to arrive." I released my hand, feeling a muffled irritation rise up inside. At 32, I was still being told how to behave at the table. Voices came from the hallway. My father spoke in an unusually high, almost ingratiating tone. "Mr. Hammond, Mrs. Hammond, we're so glad you could come. Please come in." I straightened up and prepared to play the perfect daughter. 2 men entered the living room, a tall man in an expensive suit and an elegant woman in her 50s. They were followed by 2 younger men with leather folders in their hands. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Eunice." The father gestured to the mother, who immediately smiled, completely transformed. "And my daughter, Arrow." I stepped forward, extending my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Mr. Hammond shook my hand, his gaze lingering on my face for a moment, but without much interest. Mrs. Hammond nodded with a polite smile. The two assistants didn't even glance in my direction, focused entirely on my father. "I'm sorry I'm late," Mr. Hammond said. "There were some unexpected circumstances, and I had to stay in the office for a while." "It's all right, it's absolutely all right," Mr. Hammond said, beaming with joy. "The important thing is that you're here. Please, have a seat. Perhaps an aperitif before dinner?" The guests were seated in the living room, and the standard exchange of pleasantries began. The weather, traffic, Winchester's architecture, all topics that people who have nothing in common but have to keep up a conversation discuss. I sat in silence, occasionally inserting a word or two when a question was addressed directly to me. My mother was fussing over drinks. My father was complimenting Aquacorp and its accomplishments. I watched the scene from the sidelines, feeling increasingly alienated. These people, my parents, were willing to do anything for a good deal, even use their own daughter as a stage set to create the image of an ideal family. "What do you do, Arrow?" Mrs. Hammond asked suddenly, when the conversation had stopped for a moment. I opened my mouth to answer, but my father beat me to it. "Oh, Arrow works in the environmental field," he said with a casual wave of his hand. "Something to do with water, if I remember correctly. It wasn't a big deal." I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation. No big deal was how he'd judged my life's work. "Actually," I decided to keep quiet, "I run a company that develops innovative water purification systems. We've patented a technology that— Eunice, maybe it's time to serve dinner." My father interrupted me loudly. "I'm sure our guests are hungry after a long day." My mother jumped up immediately, giving me a warning glance. "Of course, everything is ready. Please, everyone to the table." Dinner went on in the same vein. My father talked about the advantages of the location of his land. My mother poured wine and smiled at the guests' every word, and I tried to stay calm, though I was seething inside. Several times Mrs. Hammond tried to make conversation with me, but each time either my father or mother cleverly took the initiative, preventing me from talking about my work. After dessert, Mr. Hammond leaned back in his chair. "Well, Mr. Pemberton, I must say your proposal sounds interesting, but before we get into the details, I'd like to know a little more about your family. Aquacorp is a company with family values, and we prefer to work with people who share our approach." Dad brightened up. "Oh, Eunice and I have been married for 35 years, always supported each other in every endeavor, and of course we've raised a beautiful daughter." He nodded in my direction with a strained smile. "That's wonderful." Mr. Hammond nodded. "Does your daughter help you with your business?" There was silence for a moment. Her father looked as if he had swallowed a lemon. "No, Arrow has her own career." He said the word as if he were putting it in quotation marks. "I'd like to hear about it," Mrs. Hammond said softly, looking at me. "You mentioned something about water purification systems, and then something happened that I hadn't expected." My mother, instead of letting me answer, stood up abruptly. "Arrow, honey, could you help me in the kitchen?" Her voice sounded cloyingly sweet, but her eyes were throwing lightning bolts. I started to rise, but Mrs. Hammond waved her hand. "Oh, please, let her stay. I'm really interested." "I assure you her work is of no interest." My father laughed nervously. "It's more important to discuss the details of our potential deal. I've prepared all the documents. And yet," Mr. Hammond turned to me, "tell me about your company, Arrow." I straightened up, feeling my mother kick my leg hard under the table. "My company is called CleanFlow," I began. "We design and manufacture high-efficiency filtration systems that—" "Excuse me," interrupted one of the young assistants who had been silent until then. "CleanFlow? The same company that developed the membrane technology with reduced energy consumption?" I nodded, surprised that he knew about us. "Yes, it's our patented technology." "Unbelievable." He turned to Mr. Hammond. "Sir, this is the company I was telling you about. They've revolutionized filtration technology." My parents' faces stretched in amazement. My mother opened her mouth but didn't make a sound. My father drummed his fingers nervously on the table. "Arrow," his voice sounded strained, "perhaps you could help your mother with the coffee. There's no need to bore our guests with professional details, but Mr. Hammond was already focused on me. How many branches do you have at the moment? I hear you're expanding into Europe? Yes, we already have offices in 3 countries, and next year we plan to open a representative office in Germany. I tried to speak calmly, though my heart was pounding with excitement. Arrow! My mother's voice sounded almost hysterical. Into the kitchen at once! Mrs. Hammond raised her eyebrows in surprise. Mr. Hammond frowned. I rose slowly from the table, apologizing to my guests. As soon as we were in the kitchen, my mother came at me. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Why are you drawing attention to yourself? This meeting is for your father, not for you to brag about your work." "I wasn't bragging," I replied, trying to keep my voice low. "I was asked, and I answered. That's not why you were brought here." Her face contorted with anger. "You were supposed to just sit there and maintain the family's image, not pull the blanket over you." At that moment, her father burst into the kitchen. His face was red with anger. "What's going on?" he hissed. "I left the guests alone because of you." "It's Arrow," my mother ratted me out. "She's deliberately trying to get attention to ruin your deal." "What?" I couldn't believe my ears. "I was just answering a question about my job." My father clenched his fists. "Listen to me carefully." His voice shook with restrained rage. "Now you're going to go and say you need to leave immediately. Make up anything you want, a sick friend, a work emergency. I don't care. But you will leave this house now." "Dad, that's absurd." I shook my head. "The guests are asking me questions. It would be weird if I just got up and left." "I don't care." His voice rose so high that I was afraid the guests wouldn't hear. "You've always been a burden, always ruining everything, and now you're doing the same thing." "I'm not ruining anything," I countered, feeling a lump come up in my throat. Even after all these years, his words hurt. "I'm just talking about my work." "Nobody cares about your work," he exploded. "These people are here for my deal, not to hear about your filters and pipes. You're going to ruin this business meeting. Get out." His shout echoed through the kitchen. My mother squeezed her head into her shoulders fearfully, then rushed to the door, checking to see if the guests had heard. I stood there stunned. All my life I'd tried to earn their approval, their pride, and all I'd gotten was an order to disappear because my accomplishments somehow threatened their plans. "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll leave." I headed into the dining room to apologize to my guests and pick up my purse. My father followed me, and my mother scurried along beside me, mumbling something about coffee. When we entered the dining room, we froze on the threshold. The guests were standing, evidently preparing to leave. Mr. Hammond was holding his jacket, and the assistants had already packed their papers. "Ah, there you are," he said coldly. "I'm afraid we'll have to end our evening earlier than planned. An emergency has arisen." "But what about our deal?" Father looked confused. "We haven't discussed the details yet." "I don't think that's necessary," Mr. Hammond replied, exchanging glances with his wife. "We have revised our plans." At that moment, one of the assistants, the same one who had learned about CleanFlow, looked up from his tablet and looked at me. His eyes widened with surprise. "Wait," he said, turning to Mr. Hammond. "Sir, I just checked. Arrow Pemberton is the founder and president of CleanFlow, the very company we wanted to enter into a technology licensing agreement with." There was absolute silence in the room. All eyes turned to me. Mr. Hammond slowly lowered the jacket he was holding. "Madam President," he said with growing surprise, "we didn't know it was your family." Time seemed to stand still. I stood, feeling the stares of everyone present. Mother froze with the coffee pot in her hands, her face turning white. Father blinked several times, as if trying to comprehend what he was hearing. Mr. Hammond looked at me with increasing interest, while his assistant continued to check something on his tablet. "The president?" Dad finally squeezed out. "What president?" Mrs. Hammond shifted her gaze from me to my parents. "You didn't know?" There was a tone of surprise in her voice. I took a deep breath. The moment of truth hadn't come the way I'd planned, but there was no retreat. "Yes, I'm the founder and president of CleanFlow," I confirmed, trying to speak calmly. We specialize in innovative water purification systems with minimal environmental impact. My mother set the coffee pot on the table so abruptly that some of the contents spilled out. Don't be silly, Arrow. Her voice trembled. You're working. Somewhere out there. With the environment. Mrs. Pemberton. The second assistant, the one who had been silent until then, intervened. Your daughter runs one of the fastest-growing companies in the clean tech sector. Their stock is up 48% in the last year. Her father gripped the back of his chair as if he suddenly found it difficult to stand. There must be some mistake, he muttered. Arrow can't. She never. It's not a mistake, Dad. I looked him straight in the eye. I founded PureFlow 7 years ago. Now we have over 300 employees in 3 countries and a turnover in the tens of millions. Mr. Hammond shook his head, clearly trying to make sense of the situation. Miss Pemberton, I must confess, we've been looking for a meeting with you for months. Your membrane filtration technology is exactly what AquaCorp needs for a new project. For the project on my father's land? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Now it was Mr. Hammond's turn to look surprised. No, he shook his head. We're not interested in these lands. They're not suitable for our needs, not enough acreage and a bad location with respect to water. My father sat back in his chair, his face an unhealthy gray color. But you said. My realtor said, I'm afraid you've been misinformed. Mr. Hammond pressed his lips together. We came here because your realtor promised to introduce us to influential people in the region. We need contacts to further our interests. But we had no idea that Arrow Pemberton was your daughter. Her mother sank slowly into the chair beside her father, her perfect hair disheveled and a look of confusion on her face. I don't understand, she whispered. Arrow had always been ordinary, nothing special. Her words cut me to the heart, but I was used to that assessment. Mrs. Hammond gave my mother a judgmental glance, then turned to me. Miss Pemberton, perhaps we should move this conversation to a more professional setting? I felt something shift inside me. I'd spent my whole life trying to gain acceptance from my parents, but now, for the first time, I realized that I no longer needed their approval. I had succeeded without them, in spite of them. There's no need, I straightened, squaring my shoulders. Since we're all here, let's discuss your proposal. I know that AquaCorp is interested in licensing our membrane filtration technology. Mr. Hammond nodded, clearly impressed with my business acumen. Mr. Hammond nodded, clearly impressed with my business acumen. Your technology will allow us to reduce our wastewater treatment plant's energy consumption by 1/3. As long as we meet all environmental standards, I added. Our company has a strong commitment to environmental impact. Mr. Hammond sat down again, and his assistants followed suit. The parents watched with a look of utter confusion, as if they couldn't believe their daughter was conducting serious business negotiations in their own dining room. Of course, nodded Mr. Hammond. We are prepared to accept all your terms. In fact, that's why we've been looking for a meeting with you for so long. I grabbed a napkin and began writing down the main points I wanted to discuss. Years of negotiating have taught me to always be in control of the situation. First, I need to understand what kind of project you are planning and how our technology will be used, I said calmly and confidently. PurePatak is very selective in choosing partners. Mr. Hammond signaled to his assistants and they began laying out documents on the table. One of them pulled out a laptop and opened the presentation. The mother automatically moved the dessert plates, making room, her movements mechanical, her face detached. The next hour passed in a detailed discussion of the technical aspects of possible cooperation. I asked questions, clarified details, made suggestions. Mr. Hammond and his team responded with increasing respect, clearly impressed by my knowledge and business acumen. My parents watched in silence. My father tried a few times to get a word in, but quickly realized he didn't know what he was talking about and shut up. The mother sat there with a frozen face, automatically pouring coffee when someone finished their cup. I think this is an excellent basis for further discussion, I summarized when all the main points had been covered. I propose to continue at the CleanFlow office early next week. My team will prepare a preliminary contract based on today's conversation. Mr. Hammond looked more than satisfied. Excellent, Miss Pemberton. I must say, your reputation as a brilliant negotiator is fully justified. He handed me a business card, though he undoubtedly had my official contact. Call anytime. We are very interested in cooperation. When all the documents had been collected and handshakes exchanged, Mrs. Hammond lingered beside me. You know, she said quietly, I always admire women who build their businesses from scratch, especially in a difficult field like yours. I thanked her, feeling a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Recognition from a stranger somehow meant more than I'd expected. My parents walked the guests to the door. I could hear my father trying to keep the conversation going by mentioning some of his other landholdings, but Mr. Hammond politely, but firmly, made it clear that they were only interested in working with CleanFlow. When the door closed behind the guests, a heavy silence hung in the house. I stood in the dining room gathering my notes. Mother entered first, her movements slow, as if she had aged 10 years in one evening. Why didn't you tell us? There was none of her usual harshness in her voice, only tiredness and confusion. I looked up from my papers. Did you ever ask? My father came in next, his face a mixture of disbelief and something akin to envy. Are you really president? He said the word as if he couldn't believe it could apply to me. Yes, Dad. I started the company 7 years ago. We're now worth hundreds of millions. He sank slowly into his chair, never taking his eyes off me. But how? You never... We thought you were just working in some small office? I finished it for him. Yeah, I know what you thought. You never believed I could accomplish anything. Never took an interest in my life enough to know the truth. Mother shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. We wanted the best for you, Arrow. We always wanted... No, Mother, I interrupted her gently but firmly. You wanted me to conform to your ideas of what a daughter should be, but you never asked me what I wanted, and you never believed in my abilities. Father stood up, his hands trembling. You could have told us. We're your parents. We had a right to know. Would you have believed? I asked quietly. When I talked about my projects, you called them nonsense. When I tried to talk about my successes, you changed the subject. Today, you kicked me out of the house so I wouldn't ruin your meeting. My mother made a strange sound, something between a sob and a chuckle. And all these years, you just let us think you were nothing. I looked at her with a sad smile. I never thought I was a nobody, Mom. It was you who thought that. And at some point, I realized that it was easier to let you live with that belief than to constantly prove otherwise. I gathered my things and headed for the exit. I turned around on the threshold. My parents stood in the middle of the dining room, looking lost and suddenly aged. Part of me wanted to comfort them, to tell them that everything would be okay, that we could start over. But another, stronger part knew that some relationships can't be fixed with one conversation. I'll get back to you next week, I said. I think we all need time to process what happened. My father stepped forward, his face contorted with a mixture of emotions. Arrow, wait! I can help you with the company. I have connections, experience. I shook my head, feeling real pity for him for the first time all evening. Dad, you don't even know what my company does, but thanks for the offer. Stepping outside, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. The sky above Winchester was studded with stars. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of passing cars. A normal night in a small town, but it was different for me. I hailed a cab, and while I waited, I sat down on a bench in the garden. Strangely, I felt neither triumph nor gloating, only relief and a quiet sadness. Maybe somewhere deep inside, I still hoped that one day my parents would see the real me and be proud. But tonight had shown me that they just weren't capable of that. When the cab pulled up, I looked back at the house one last time. The lights were on in the windows, but there were no silhouettes to be seen. I wondered what they were talking about. Are they trying to make sense of the fact that their daughter is not a loser, but a successful businesswoman? Or are they already figuring out how to capitalize on my success? On the way to the hotel, I checked my work email. A few requests from clients, a report from a research group, a reminder about Monday's presentation. Routine things that now seemed so reliable and real compared to the chaos of family relationships. My phone rang. The screen popped up with the name Tasha, my assistant. Arrow, sorry for the late call. Her voice sounded excited. Aquacorp just called. They want to reschedule the meeting for Monday. They say they're ready to sign the preliminary agreement already. I smiled. Hammond wasted no time. Okay, Tasha. Get everything you need ready, and tell the lawyers to check their final offer. I want to make sure that all environmental standards are met. Of course, she replied, then paused. How was dinner with your parents? I glanced out the cab window at the lights of Winchester passing by. Let's just say they know what I do now. Oh, I could hear the understanding in her voice. Are they proud? That simple question made me wonder. Are they proud? Hardly. More like shocked, perhaps envious. But true pride requires an understanding of the value of what another person has achieved, and my parents never appreciated what was important to me. They're surprised, I finally answered. But you know what? I realize that I don't need their pride anymore. I'm proud of myself, and that's enough. At the hotel, I stood at the window for a long time, looking at the night city. Somewhere out there, in a house with perfectly trimmed bushes, my parents were probably still trying to realize that their daughter wasn't the loser they thought she was. Maybe now they would brag about my accomplishments to their friends, taking credit for some of my success. Maybe they'll try to repair the relationship now that I've become somebody. But something was different about me today. I was no longer the girl who desperately craved parental approval. I became a woman who knows her worth, whether others recognize it or not. I opened my laptop and began to look at the data from the latest tests of our new filtration system. The numbers, the graphs, the results, all the things that were truly mine. Something I had created without anyone else's help, against all doubts and obstacles. The phone rang again. Eunice Pemberton came up on the screen. My finger hovered over the answer button. Part of me wanted to hear what she would say. Would she apologize? Would she try to justify herself somehow? But the other part knew this was not the time for that conversation. The wounds were too fresh, too many emotions bubbling inside. I dismissed the call and sent a quick message. Talk to you later, I need time. Then I turned off the sound on my phone and went back to work. Back to what had always given me strength and confidence, to what had become my true home. In the morning, I woke up feeling strangely light. It was as if the heavy weight I had been carrying all these years had finally fallen from my shoulders. I was no longer a secret that needed to be hidden. No longer was I a disappointment that needed to be justified. I was just me. Arrow Pemberton, a woman who had built a successful business and lived by her own rules. After breakfast, I checked my phone. 5 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, and 1 message from him. We need to talk. It's important. I knew this conversation was inevitable, but now I was approaching it from a position of strength, not weakness. Not as a daughter desperately seeking approval, but as an equal ready for an honest dialogue. I answered briefly, I'll be in Winchester next weekend. We'll talk then. Then I opened the mail and wrote a letter to my team, telling them about the preliminary arrangement with Aquacorp and the tasks for the coming week. At the end, she added, Remember that each of you are valuable not by what others think of you, but by what you do every day. Proud to work with you. After sending the letter, I packed my bags and left the hotel. Ahead was a new day and a new chapter in my life, a chapter in which I was finally free from the shadow of parental expectations and disappointments. A chapter I was writing on my own.